This paper and research emerges from my ongoing interest in digital performance, including what I presented in the chapter, Strange Mothers in the Digital Art in Ireland book, which then turned into its own book, the research monograph, The Maternal Digital Subjectivity and the Aesthetics of Interruption, that came out last week. And so I'm not going to go into too much depth about how I define digital performance, which is quite a broad and amalgamous thing. But what's interesting is I was working on the book and working as an artist, a performance artist, working with digital technologies, and a digital artist working with performance, thinking about how the COVID-19 pandemic did bring this, the way Connor referred to it, this forced digitality to us. And you know, a lot of live events, performance events would then go online. And that included everything from, you know, our social gatherings, classes, meetings, to conferences, theater events, performance events. And for years now, digital technologies have enabled these kinds of visual and oral communication where we can come together while being physically distant. And there is some great literature on this topic in the theater and performance art, including Chris Salter's book, Entangled, Stephen Dixon's History of Performance, and Neil O'Dwyer's new book on digital scenography that came out last year. This work is also part of an ongoing debate surrounding technology and its influence on performance, as we see, for instance, in the work of Philip Auslander, and thinking of ways how also performance defies technology. So I'm thinking here of Peggy Phelan's work, talking about how performance has a quality of being unmarked. So generally speaking, though, prior to 2020, these kinds of performances that engage with the virtual have been treated as somewhat inferior to human or in-person, in real life contact. We're all together now. This kind of minor means of engagement when it's not possible to connect in person. And as we're kind of shifting into this time, this period of forced digitality to, you know, now we're coming back to being together, it's how can we bring what we've worked with and learned and dealt with into this time? In October 2021, the international research group Futures Stage argued that virtual spaces need to be considered when conceptualizing the stage. Quote, the future stage needs to be intimately entangled with the other stages on which contemporary life is performed, from the streets and sidewalks to TikTok and Zoom to the workplace to cultural festivals and fairs, end quote. So when I originally proposed this paper, I anticipated talking about 3 different examples, but 10 minutes won't allow for that. So I'm just going to focus on Dave McGee's practice, who I know is a performance artist who's been working with technologies as part of their practice even prior to COVID, and then also talk a bit about my project Emergent, which is now up in the Lord Mayor's Pavilion. And so thinking about how the virtual in these examples functions as a site of performance rather than simply a means of presenting performance work digitally. And all of this work is heavily influenced by the philosophy of technology of Gilbert Simondon and also his techno-aesthetics, which has been kind of an ongoing aspect of my work for the past few years. And I'm not going to, again, go into too much depth of it, but check out his work. He's cool. So, there we go. Let's see. Oop, nope, we don't want that. This. Okay. Let's see if this will get this playing. So this is the work, A Thing Least Like Eternity. And what's striking about this piece by Dave McGee is the minimalism of its composition. It really draws attention to the subtlety of gesture. The body movements are very, very simple, the movement of the head. We can see how the use of technology in relation to this work is transformative. I don't know, are we getting volume? Technology is used to alter the voice, but also to create a performance space, a non-place or eternal present. As the artist describes, quote, the artist housed inside a skull, having given birth to themselves, looped in an eternal moment. McGee is interested in challenging dualities. This includes dualities between religion and atheism, gender binaries, and the body and technologies, through a negotiation of performed gestures. A Thing Least Like Eternity functions as a queer origin story, introducing what physicist and theorist Karen Berard refers to as, quote, radically queer configuring of space-time mattering that constitutes an uncanny topological dynamic that arrests straight tales of birthing and kinship and gives birth to a new modes of generativity, including but not limited to a self-birthed womb, end quote. Death is entangled with birth, technology with the performing body, as the looping qualities of the work perpetuate a gift-like eternal genesis. In this way, digital technologies enable reimaginings of the body, which Legacy Russell points to the mutability of the body itself. Quote, we use body to give material form to an idea that has no form, an assemblage that is abstract. The concept of a body houses within it social, political, and cultural discourses, which change based on where the body is situated and how it is read, end quote. Digital technologies are what make this work feasible, as the pixelated presence of performance space enabled transformation of the bodies. And this feature had already been present in McGee's work, who regularly uses digital tech, including video projections, voice alteration, recordings, within their practice, even in works that would take place in the gallery live. What we see is a distinctive performed aesthetic encounter in this entanglement of performed gestures with technical objects. Gilbert Simondon defines the aesthetic encounter as instigated by an aesthetic object, which does not need to be an art object in the traditional sense, such as a sculpture or painting, but anything and any experience that has the capacity of bringing about such an encounter. The aesthetic encounter functions as a means of drawing awareness to the perception of the senses, experience through a sensitivity that highlights and forges relations between people, technology, and places, including the virtual space. Without going into too much detail about Simondon and his definition of aesthetics, which we find his discussion of aesthetics throughout his work on the mode of existence of technical objects, but also in a shorter essay on techno-aesthetics that was published after his death. He considers technological or technical objects as aesthetic, not because of their form, we're thinking Immanuel Kant there, or content, but how they function. So when a technical object is in use, that is where the aesthetic experience comes through, this encounter with it. And technical objects for Simondon are part of the milieu, they're mediators. They are not just tools used by humans, but we work with them and are relational through this process. And so we can see this more in shifting to the work Body Without World, which was a piece created in 2021. And this work is slightly different, and it's not just thinking about it as a performance, the presentation of the body, but it's also performative in that it evokes a meditation app. You have those little mindfulness meditation apps where you listen and the bells ding every few minutes, but here the bells are too persistent. The rhythm disturbs, but as time progresses, there is attempts to come to accept the flow of this work, like coming to accept the presence of chronic pain and to function in spite of it. Time is compressed and looping, and this is what McGee refers to as pain time. Quote, the mindlessness of the enforced mindfulness of chronic pain, forced to inhabit the ever fetishized moment, end quote. In this way, the work invites a performed engagement with the viewer in this shared space, a kinesthetic empathy of pain. The digital space is a performance space of interaction, of shared experience. interactions with material environments that are also direct intersubjective relations. And just about the figures in the front, those are 3D scans of the artist's body that are then animated and turned into this kind of spinal cord of it. So, okay. And for time, I'm just going to shift. You can, yeah, I'd like to play this longer, but I can't. Okay. Again, this is another work that's also looping. So, there we go. So I just want to talk a bit about Emergent, which is the project that's now showing. I'm just going to show one of the channels of the piece. What this project is this is something I created throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's based on the idea that the body is the database of lived experience. And it includes generative animations and sound compositions, some of which are based on data collected from my Fitbit that I started wearing at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. It functions as a portrait of experience of COVID-19 through the body, but also thinking of the body of data and the body producing data. Emergent engages with the memory of the flesh, becoming the impetus for aesthetic encounters through digital performance. These are sketches that I created, usually one a day. I would create a sketch and then post it, and I collected a number of these and brought them together. Some of them are just, generative animations playing with form and text, as you see here. They also, this is the channel that includes some of the biometric data. That's just the loading screen. It needs to kind of read the file. It pulls a day or a month randomly, sometimes heart rate data. So this is a sonification of heart rate data. Also, the kind of colors and movements of it are based on the heart rate, the size of the squares and stuff. There is one, this one here is based on my activity minutes. So comparing very active, sedentary, moderately active, and lightly active minutes. So thinking of different ways how the body is quantified through the Fitbit. In these animations, you see how the data is also used to reanimate the performing body. So depending on the level and the length of duration of activity minutes, it shows certain images. This next one uses sleep data. So again, using all this data, not necessarily clarifying what the data presents, so getting away from that tendency in data visualization to provide clarity of what data is. Instead, it's introducing confusion, obfuscation, and a new aesthetic encounter with data. When you go to see it in the pavilion, you're going to see there are 4 channels. I also have one channel, a separate sketch, that's set up with a live infrared camera feed that you can interact with. So that's another channel. And then there's text generator and then some 3D animations as part of it. So a lot of this project is, it was thinking about the quantified self, the measuring of the self, the pandemic, the restrictions on movement, but then also Karen Berard's statement that, quote, "we are part of the nature we seek to understand." So thinking about how, the data is collected by the device, but there's also gaps in this information. There's also steps that aren't counted. If the Fitbit doesn't count the steps, do they really happen? You can also trick the Fitbit when you're driving. If you move your arm really fast, you can get a lot of extra steps as you're going. So even that, it's an inaccurate portrayal. And so here, with this work, it's building upon Simondon's definition of information that is a, quote, "ongoing operation of differences resolved not into form, but sustained in formation," end quote. And Jason Holscher describes art as aesthetic information, or information that is in process, that, quote, "resists settling into stability relative to a context, information that produces rather than resolves indeterminacy, while sustaining rather than merely introducing difference. Here, I'll do another sketch there. Aesthetic experience is a generative experience of information in its, quote, peculiar artistic mode, information that not only introduces difference, but produces and sustains an operation of differencing. And so as this piece is shown, you have the four channels playing together. It's set up so the sketches kind of bleed into each other visually and sonically. And as it generates, the piece itself evolves and changes over time. Also, none of it is being documented. So we do have that kind of quality that the generative work, when it happens, that kind of liveness of performance that Peggy Phelan is asking us to hold on to. So, yeah, that's it.